My name is Walter Dean, and I'm 81 years old. I live alone in the house I bought with my wife Margaret 50 years ago, a modest two-story in the suburbs of Cedar Falls, Iowa. It's a quiet place, too quiet sometimes, but it holds the only memories I have left that still feel solid and warm. Margaret passed away 6 years ago from lung cancer, and since then, silence has settled into every corner of this house like a second skin. There used to be laughter in the hallways, the faint smell of cinnamon from her baking in the kitchen, the creak of her knitting chair as she rocked gently in the sunroom. Now the only sounds are the groans of old wood and the ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace, the one she inherited from her father. I speak aloud sometimes, just to make sure my voice still works, but I usually stop midway through a sentence when I remember no one is listening. Margaret used to say I mumbled too much. I suppose she was right. After she died, I kept things running. The house, the bills, the garden. Not because I had the strength or energy, but because I couldn't stand the idea of letting her work fade away. We spent our whole lives building this little kingdom. Every bush in the backyard, every shelf in the pantry, every squeaky step was a joint decision. She had the patience of a saint and the memory of a steel trap. I can't tell you how many times she saved me from paying the gas bill twice or mixing up dates for medical appointments. Without her, I've had to be two people, the forgetful husband and the woman who remembered everything. It's exhausting. I have one son, Jared, and a grandson, Aiden. Jared is 56 now, a financial planner who wears pressed shirts and drives an imported sedan. We never saw eye to eye. He was always embarrassed by my profession. I taught middle school history for 37 years, and I did it proudly. Jared thought it was a waste of time, that I should have gone into finance like his mother's cousin, who ended up managing half the city's pension funds. He once told me, I think he was 24, that I'd chosen poverty with dignity. And I remember laughing because that phrase sounded like something one of my students would say in a debate class. Jared never liked when I laughed at his ideas. He has his mother's face, but none of her softness. Margaret always tried to patch things up between us, but after she died, there was no one left to moderate. We drifted. He called me on Christmas, and sometimes on my birthday. That was the extent of it. I stopped expecting more. 2 years ago, Jared called out of the blue. He said the housing market was bad, and they were thinking of selling their place and moving in with me temporarily, just to save for something better. He made it sound like it was a gift, like they were doing me a favor by bringing life back into the house. "You don't need all that space, Dad," he said. "It'll be good for everyone." I didn't argue. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I wanted to believe I still had a family, and this was their way of coming home. So I said yes. 3 weeks later, a moving truck pulled into my driveway, and Jared stepped out like a man returning from war. His wife, Melissa, followed, giving me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then came Aiden, tall, smug, and disinterested, scrolling on his phone as he walked past me into the house without a word. They settled in like dust, fast and without ceremony. Melissa took over the kitchen, rearranging Margaret's drawers and calling the spices ancient. Jared turned the den into his office, filling it with charts and dual monitors and noise. Aiden took the guest room upstairs, slamming the door with the authority of a king claiming territory. They said it was temporary, but the weeks bled into months. Their boxes became furniture. Their habits became routine. And my house, my sanctuary, slowly became theirs. They brought a dog, too. A fat bulldog named Winston who snored louder than a chainsaw and shed hair on every surface. I didn't mind at first. I told myself it was all part of the process. Families bend and adjust. But I didn't bend. I cracked. Jared started managing my medications, saying I shouldn't be keeping track of pills at my age. Melissa insisted on doing the grocery shopping because old men get confused in stores. Aiden barely spoke to me except to mock my hearing aids or ask for the Wi-Fi password, which he changed without telling me. They began treating me like a guest in my own home, and not even a welcomed one. Jared called a plumber one afternoon without asking me, saying the pipes were too old and that I didn't understand modern plumbing. The plumber replaced a perfectly good system, and I was handed the bill. Melissa signed up for meal delivery services and canceled my subscriptions. She threw away Margaret's handmade curtains because they were too dusty and replaced them with factory blinds. Every time I questioned something, Jared would say, "Come on, Dad, you're getting worked up again." As if rational protest was just a symptom of senility, I tried to find peace in the garden. Margaret's roses still bloomed each spring, stubborn as ever. I tended to them early in the mornings before the house stirred. I'd sip coffee on the porch, listening to birds and pretending the world inside was still the one we built together. But even that was taken. Melissa complained that the backyard looked outdated and said she wanted to landscape it properly. One day I came home from a doctor's appointment and found 3 of Margaret's rose bushes uprooted, the soil bare like a wound. I said nothing. I went upstairs and sat in the dark. That night, Jared said I was being overly sentimental. Then came the little indignities. Jared would sigh if I forgot to close a cabinet. Melissa would double-check if I'd locked the front door. Aiden once filmed me dozing off on the couch and posted it with the caption, "Grandpa Exy has stopped working." It got over 4,000 likes on whatever app he uses. I asked him to take it down. He laughed. "It's just a joke, old man," he said. I wanted to shout, but my voice wouldn't rise. I felt like a man shouting into the wind. No one heard me. No one wanted to. And yet, through all this, I stayed silent. I told myself they were family, that families have rough patches, that perhaps I was the problem. I started questioning my own memory. Had I really left the stove on last week? Did I really forget to pay the electricity bill? Or did Jared just say I did? I stopped using the phone after Melissa complained that I couldn't hear properly. I started writing letters to myself to remember things. There's a drawer in the kitchen filled with those notes now. Some of them gibberish, some full of rage. I never sent them. Who would read them? It wasn't until the day Aiden laughed, really laughed, that I realized something irreversible had shifted. We were in the living room. Jared had called a family meeting. He said it was time to think about next steps. Melissa handed me a brochure for a senior living community. "It's very modern, Dad," she said, as if I should be grateful. "There's bingo and a pool." Jared chimed in. "It's for your safety, Dad. You're getting forgetful." Aiden smirked. "Guess the Wi-Fi will finally be ours." I looked at all 3 of them. The son who used to ride on my shoulders, the daughter-in-law who once thanked me for paying their mortgage deposit, the grandson I'd held as a baby. And I realized they weren't here to help me. They were here to remove me. And that's when I remembered something very important, something they had all forgotten, or never bothered to ask. The house, the deed. It's mine. Only mine. And this story, the one they think they're writing, is about to take a very different turn. The day everything began to unravel didn't start any differently than the others, which somehow made it worse. Predictable cruelty has a way of hollowing a man out more than a sudden blow. That morning, the sun came through the kitchen window just as it always did, casting that familiar, soft rectangle of light onto the oak table where Margaret used to lay out our breakfast. I was sitting with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, pretending to do the crossword puzzle, but the pen in my hand hadn't moved in 10 minutes. I kept glancing up at the hallway, waiting for Jared to come stomping down the stairs in those stiff leather shoes he insisted on wearing even at home. the ones that sounded like judgment with every step. Sure enough, at 7:15 sharp, I heard them. The sound of someone who believes his presence commands order. He entered the kitchen with a phone glued to his ear, barking instructions to someone at the office, as if his conversations carried state secrets instead of mutual fund projections. He didn't even glance at me as he opened the fridge, complained about the milk being expired, and left the door ajar. Melissa came down moments later, dressed like she was on her way to a board meeting at a pharmaceutical company, though she worked part-time from home doing social media consulting for wellness brands. She greeted me with the usual forced chirp, a brightness that felt more like noise than kindness. Then she took one look at the crusts of toast on my plate and said, "You really should avoid gluten at your age, Walter. It's inflammatory." I didn't reply. It wasn't a conversation, just a warning issued from the throne of the health-conscious elite. Then came Aiden, with his earbuds in, nodding to a beat only he could hear, brushing past me without a glance or a word, grabbing an energy drink from the counter like it owed him something, and leaving the room as quickly as he came. I went outside to the garden to escape the echo of their lives vibrating through my walls. The roses were drooping from yesterday's unexpected frost. I bent down, carefully clipping deadheads, whispering an apology to Margaret with every stem I discarded. She loved these flowers, tended to them with the same tenderness she once gave to Jared when he scraped his knee or failed his first driving test. She would have cried to see them this way. Neglected, dried out, their roots starving for attention. And I cried too, in my way, silently, through the brittle creak of my knees and the ache in my back, reminders that nothing could be preserved forever, not gardens, not trust, not even family. Later that afternoon, I went inside to retrieve the bills from the front hallway drawer. I had a routine: sit at the kitchen table, arrange them by due date, write checks slowly and deliberately because my handwriting trembled now. But when I reached into the drawer, the stack wasn't there. Only a single envelope remained, stamped with Jared's name. Confused, I went to his office, hesitated at the threshold, then knocked softly. No answer. I opened the door, stepped into the room that had once been the den where Margaret kept her quilting supplies. Now it was all steel and screens, a man cave for spreadsheets. On his desk, a pile of opened mail sat haphazardly, including all the utility bills. I saw my name on the top right corners, slashed open roughly, papers folded in ways I never would have. I started to gather them, but my eye caught something else, a slim navy folder tucked beneath a stack of legal pads. Curious, I pulled it out. It wasn't mine. The name on the cover read Dean Property Transition Plan. I opened it, my hands already shaking, and the first page nearly knocked the wind from me. It was a legal document, a draft, unsigned but detailed, outlining the voluntary transfer of property ownership from me to Jared and Melissa Dean. The rationale section read, in clinical detachment, due to increasing cognitive lapses and demonstrated challenges with independent living, Walter Dean is to be moved to assisted living while relinquishing property rights to ensure long-term families. Stability. I stared at that line for a long time. Demonstrated challenges, increasing cognitive lapses. They were writing my obituary in legal language while I was still alive and pouring my own coffee every morning. There were notes attached, highlighting next steps, legal advisories, a suggested date for execution of transfer, just 3 weeks away. I turned another page and saw a draft letter addressed to Oak Ridge Senior Living Facility, inquiring about immediate availability for one Walter Dean, 81, retired, widowed, possible early-stage dementia, requires mild supervision. I stood there, motionless, folder in hand, the silence of the room pressing on my chest like a boot. I felt something inside me shift, as though the floor had tilted and gravity had become a stranger. I was not losing my mind. I was being erased. Just then I heard the front door open and the murmur of voices. Jared and Melissa returning from the grocery store. I closed the folder, tucked it back exactly where I'd found it, and quietly left the office. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, stared into the mirror at a man who suddenly felt like a trespasser in his own reflection. My hands trembled, but not from age, from something deeper, colder. Betrayal, when it comes from blood, doesn't bleed. It freezes. At dinner that night, Melissa made a kale and quinoa dish that tasted like wet paper. Jared talked about an upcoming conference in Phoenix. Aiden didn't come down, said he was grinding on some video project. I barely said a word. I chewed, I nodded, I smiled when spoken to. Inside, I was rewinding every conversation from the last few weeks. Every mention of doctor visits, every time they corrected me about dates or names, every time they looked at each other with that knowing glance when I misplaced my keys or forgot where I'd put the remote, they were building a case brick by subtle brick, dressing their theft in the robes of compassion. The next morning, I waited until the house was empty. Jared left for a client meeting, Melissa went to her yoga class, and Aiden was out doing content at a skate park. I climbed the stairs slowly, heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. I opened the fireproof box Margaret and I kept in our bedroom closet, our old fortress of security. Inside were the birth certificates, insurance policies, our marriage license, and beneath them, the deed to the house. I held it like a relic, hands pressed flat across the page. I read it carefully, twice. And there it was. Margaret and I, joint owners. And below, in the ink of legal finality, the updated title after her death. Sole ownership transferred to Walter Dean. No Jared, no Melissa, no family trust. Just me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my hands. So that was it. They had no legal claim. They assumed, or hoped, that I had forgotten, that I had become so dependent I wouldn't think to check, that I'd go quietly into some sanitized apartment with bingo nights and scheduled bowel movements. But they'd miscalculated. This house wasn't just property. It was my life, my wife's legacy, my last battleground. And now I knew exactly what I had to do. I returned the deed to the box, locked it, and replaced it under the blankets where we used to keep it hidden during storm warnings. I went downstairs, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat in the living room while Winston the bulldog snored at my feet. When Jared returned that evening, he walked past me with his usual distracted indifference. Melissa gave me a nod. Aiden was in the kitchen eating cereal at 7 p.m., the kind of grown child who thinks adulthood is a matter of attitude, not responsibility. He looked at me and smirked, still smug, still convinced the world bent to his version of clever. He said, "You ready for the retirement castle, Grandpa?" I looked at him and smiled. He had no idea. None of them did. But they were about to learn. The week that followed moved with a strange weight to it, as though time itself had grown thick and resistant, like trying to wade through syrup. Every interaction, every glance, every overheard conversation in that house felt like another needle, stitching a net meant to drag me under. Jared grew more deliberate in his condescension, Melissa more emboldened in her rearrangements, and Aiden, well, Aiden was no longer just silently smug. He'd taken to open ridicule. I caught him twice recording me with his phone while I sat watching television. Once when I dozed off with my mouth slightly open. The other time when I misheard something on the news and asked him to repeat it. "You're going viral, Grandpa," he said with a smirk, and I didn't know whether he was joking or not. He never showed me the videos, but the way he and his friends laughed whenever they came over left little doubt. They called me the relic behind my back, and not always quietly. It was during one of those evenings when Melissa prepared her version of dinner, some bland, green concoction masquerading as cuisine, that Jared cleared his throat and announced there would be a family meeting the following day after dinner. "Just some planning, Dad," he said, but I knew what it meant. This wasn't a discussion. This was a declaration disguised as dialogue. I nodded as if indifferent, though my stomach clenched like a fist. I spent that night restlessly turning in bed, staring at the ceiling fan circling slowly above me, listening to the muffled music thudding from Aiden's room, and the occasional whispered voices from Jared and Melissa's bedroom. The cadence of scheming, unmistakable even through drywall. I didn't sleep. The next evening, they set the stage like a play. The living room had been rearranged slightly, with chairs pulled forward and the coffee table cleared. Jared sat across from me, papers in a neat stack on his lap. Melissa perched beside him, hands folded primly. And Aiden flopped on the arm of the couch, with his phone angled just subtly enough that I suspected he was recording. Jared began in his professional voice, the one he used with clients and judges at his high school debate tournaments. "Dad, we've been thinking a lot about your future," he said, as if it were some noble cause. Melissa chimed in with her syrupy concern. "You've been doing so well, but we worry, Walter. The house is a lot to manage, and you deserve comfort, safety, community." I didn't say anything. I kept my face neutral, my gaze steady. Jared continued, "We've looked into some wonderful options. Oakwood Gardens is nearby, highly rated. You'd have your own room, a courtyard view. They have Tai Chi on Tuesdays." Aiden snorted. "And a shuffleboard league, right?" Jared shot him a warning glance but didn't reprimand him. Instead, he turned back to me. "They also have medical staff on site, meal services, social programming. It's not a nursing home, Dad. It's an opportunity for dignity." He slid a folder across the coffee table toward me. I didn't open it. I didn't even look down. "And the house?" I asked, keeping my tone mild. Jared hesitated for a beat, the salesman mask slipping just a fraction. "We'd continue to live here. It makes the most sense. You always said it should stay in the family." Melissa nodded vigorously. "You'll be right nearby. We'll visit all the time. You won't even miss it." Aiden chuckled again, biting his lip to stifle it. I glanced at him, then back at Jared. "And my things?" I asked. Melissa's smile faltered just slightly. "We'll pack up what you need. The rest, we'll store. Or donate. We'll be respectful, of course. My wedding china, Margaret's books, the hand-carved table I built in the garage when Jared was 7, all to be donated." Jared leaned forward now, sensing what he thought was my hesitation. "Dad, you don't have to decide right now, but we've made the deposit at Oakwood to hold your spot. They're expecting you by next week." It was then I noticed Melissa had a clipboard in her lap, and attached to it was a checklist. "We'll help with the packing," she said brightly. "And the paperwork is already in motion. We just need your signature on a few things to make the transition smooth." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Jared shifted. Melissa cleared her throat. Aiden glanced up from his phone, sensing something off. I finally spoke, my voice low but firm. "And what happens if I say no?" Melissa blinked. Jared furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "If I don't want to leave, if I prefer to stay in my own home." Jared gave a half laugh, the kind people use when they think they're being patient with the insane. "Dad, be reasonable. This isn't about preference. It's about need. You're not safe here alone." "But I'm not alone," I said quietly. "You're here." Jared's mouth twitched. "We can't take care of you forever, Dad. We have lives, jobs. Aiden's in college." Community college, Aiden muttered. Melissa ignored him. You'll be happier there, she said. Trust us. I stood, not abruptly, slowly, deliberately. I reached forward and placed a hand on the folder Jared had pushed toward me, and I slid it back across the table toward him. No, I said. Just that. One word. A full sentence. Jared's face hardened. Melissa sat back, her expression brittle. Aiden muttered, "Okay, Boomer," and went back to his phone. Jared stood now too. Don't make this difficult, Dad. We're trying to help you. By taking my home? I asked. By removing me like a broken appliance? Melissa stood too. It's not your home anymore, Walter. You can't even manage the thermostat without asking Jared. I looked at her. This is my house, I said calmly. I own it. Her face faltered. What? I've read the deed. Margaret and I bought this place. After she passed, it transferred solely to me. You're not listed anywhere. Not as tenants, not as co-owners. Just guests. There was a long, stretched pause. Jared's face had gone pale, then dark. You've been snooping? I've been remembering, I replied. That's not dementia, by the way. That's survival. Aiden laughed aloud then. A loud, mocking cackle. So what, you're kicking us out? He sneered. You think you're some kind of cowboy now? No, I said. Not yet. And then I walked out of the room. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. Not in words, at least, but silence is its own language, and the house grew thick with it. Melissa's cleaning became more aggressive, slamming cabinet doors. Jared spent more time on the phone behind closed doors. Aiden played his music louder. They were circling, recalibrating, realizing their plan had sprung a leak and trying to patch it with panic. 2 days later, I came home from the library, the one sanctuary they hadn't invaded, to find my room had been reorganized. My drawers were half emptied, clothes placed in boxes. The framed photo of Margaret had been removed from the nightstand and replaced with a printed schedule from Oakwood. My medication had been sorted into new containers with unfamiliar labels. I found Melissa in the kitchen, smiling too sweetly. We thought we'd help you get a head start, she said. Transition is hard. It's best to prepare early. I stared at her, then asked, Did you move my things without asking? Don't be dramatic, Walter, she replied. We're just trying to make this easier on you. By taking away everything that's mine? I asked. What will be left, Melissa? A room and a meal tray? She rolled her eyes and turned away. You're being ungrateful. Later that evening, as I sat in the garden watching the last light disappear behind the fence Margaret had once painted sky blue, I felt a chill settle over my shoulders. Not from the wind, but from something else. A certainty. They were going to do it anyway, whether I agreed or not, with or without my consent. They had convinced themselves that I was the obstacle, that I was the irrational old man clinging to a past that didn't serve them anymore, and they had every intention of removing that obstacle. Jared had power of attorney papers hidden somewhere, no doubt ready to be weaponized. Melissa had charm she could turn on in front of a social worker. Aiden had the shamelessness to spin the whole thing as a mental health intervention for clout online. They weren't going to wait for me to lose control, so I decided not to wait either. Let them think the old man was slow. Let them underestimate. That was their first mistake, and it was going to cost them everything. 3 nights after the family meeting, as shadows stretched long across the hallway, and the usual drone of late-evening television filled the living room, I feigned sleep in my armchair. It wasn't hard. They expected nothing more of me by that hour. My breathing slowed, my posture slackened just enough to appear unguarded. From the corner of my barely lidded eyes, I watched Jared walk by, glancing at me like he always did now. Not with concern, not even with irritation anymore, but with calculation. Like I was a piece on a board, almost removed, almost irrelevant. Melissa followed shortly after, whispering something I couldn't catch, but her tone betrayed the tension behind the facade of composure they wore around each other these days. I waited until the creaking upstairs floorboards signaled they'd retired for the night, then stood, moving with careful purpose. I made my way quietly to the garage, where my father's old metal filing cabinet stood half-hidden behind gardening tools and forgotten holiday decorations. Inside, wrapped in a manila envelope and a layer of plastic, was a set of photocopies I had made the day after discovering the deed. The same document confirming that the house was mine, and mine alone. Alongside it were the notarized records of Margaret's will, which specified in no uncertain terms that this home was to remain in my hands until the day I chose to pass it on, not a moment before. I returned to my room and locked the door. A small, symbolic act that I knew would enrage Jared, but which gave me a necessary illusion of control. I placed the copies in a new folder, one I would take to the bank the next morning, to our family's old lawyer, and to a real estate agency if I had to. It was time to stop surviving and start reclaiming. But before I could act, the situation changed in a way I hadn't foreseen. The following afternoon, while watering what was left of Margaret's flower beds, I heard Aiden's voice raised in the kitchen, unusually animated. He was arguing with Jared, not for me, not out of some sudden conscience, but about me. "Why do we even care?" he snapped. "Just call the damn social worker and have him declared nuts already. Get it over with." "I'm tired of waiting." "I want my room back." Jared, more measured, but clearly frayed, hissed something in reply. Then Melissa's voice cut through them both, sharp and decisive. "It has to be clean. If we're going to take legal action, it needs to look like it's for his own good, not ours." I stood outside, the hose forgotten in my hand, the water streaming into the grass, my heart thudding not with surprise anymore, but with clarity. They were escalating. They were building a case, perhaps already filing papers, crafting narratives. The kindness had disappeared. The gloves were off. I realized I had no more time to wait. That night, after they'd all gone to sleep, I wrote a letter to Martin Delaney, our family lawyer for over 30 years. I kept it brief but direct, explained that I needed to understand my full rights over the house, that I feared a forced guardianship might be attempted, that I had reason to believe my son and his wife were preparing to claim legal control over my affairs. I attached a copy of the deed, the will, and a summary of recent events, written by hand but clear. The next morning, I mailed the envelopes certified, and then, in an act that felt like sacrilege and liberation at once, I unplugged the landline. Let them wonder why no one was calling. Let them feel what it's like to be silenced. That evening brought a strange calm, as if the storm they were brewing behind my back hadn't yet leaked into their public faces. Jared made dinner, pasta with canned sauce, and Melissa pretended nothing had happened. Aiden didn't come down at all. They smiled and asked me about my day. I smiled back and said it was lovely. The food tasted like rubber, but I chewed it politely. I excused myself early, citing a headache, and once again locked my door behind me. I sat in the dark for hours, listening. Nothing came. No confrontation, no plan. Just the house groaning in its bones and the faint hum of electronics behind closed doors. 2 days later, Martin called. I recognized his voice instantly, even before he said his name. Calm, practical, the same tone he used when handling Margaret's estate with quiet dignity. He confirmed everything I already knew but needed to hear again. "Walter, they have no claim. You are the sole legal owner. If they're planning to act, it'll have to be through a guardianship hearing. and even that requires medical evidence. But you need to be careful. If they get to your doctor first or manipulate testimony, it could get complicated. I asked what I should do. His answer was immediate. Get examined. Preemptively. Independent credentialed doctors. Cognitive evaluation. Psychological fitness. Once you have those reports in hand, you'll be far harder to touch. I thanked him. We scheduled the tests. Martin would handle the logistics. When I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not just relief, but resolve. They had tried to reduce me to a husk, a burdensome shadow of a man who once stood tall. They forgot who taught Jared how to ride a bike, who paid his tuition when his business degree didn't qualify for the scholarships, who drove him home drunk when he wrecked his first car and begged me not to tell Melissa. I had carried these people, all of them, on shoulders worn thin from years of holding up a family that increasingly forgot my humanity. And so, when the envelope with the evaluation appointments arrived, I didn't hide it. I left it deliberately on the kitchen counter. Let them read it. Let them realize the tide had turned. Sure enough, that evening, Jared asked about it. I told him plainly, just a routine checkup. I thought it would be good to get a professional opinion on my mental fitness. He tried to act casual. That's smart, he said, though I saw the flicker of panic behind his eyes. Melissa didn't speak. She stared at her wine glass like it held the answer to a test she hadn't studied for. Aiden, once again, wasn't there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because something deep in me had awakened, a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The house, my house, still stood. The walls had memory. The floors had history. The garden still breathed beneath its wounds. And I, the man they thought they could erase, still had time. Still had fight. Still had the truth. And the truth was about to rise. It was only days after I scheduled the cognitive evaluations that the atmosphere inside my house shifted from latent tension to open hostility, though veiled still in the kind of artificial politeness that makes your skin crawl. Melissa, once the queen of passive correction, now hovered constantly, hovering near doors, inquiring about what pills I'd taken, glancing at my phone when I answered calls as if waiting for me to fumble. She'd begun rephrasing everything I said, echoing it back like I was some toddler learning to speak. If I said I was heading to the store, she'd respond with something like, "Okay, so you're going to the market now. You remember where it is, right?" Or, "Should I write down the way just in case?" Jared, more restrained but no less insidious, took a different tactic. He began subtly removing my agency from household functions, assuming control of bills under the guise of helping me manage, setting all mail to be forwarded to his secure inbox for convenience, and talking over me in conversations with anyone external to the household. When the electrician came to fix the hallway fuse, Jared introduced himself as the homeowner. I corrected him once, softly, but he laughed it off and continued. I could feel myself becoming invisible in the very rooms I had built with my own hands, and yet I remained outwardly calm. Each new insult silently filed away. Each new erasure of my presence quietly acknowledged. I had work to do. Meanwhile, Aiden had grown brazen in a way only the young can when they believe consequences are for someone else. I began noticing little things missing: my spare keys, my library card, an old wristwatch that Margaret had given me on our 25th anniversary. At first, I assumed I had misplaced them. Then I found the watch in Aiden's room, half buried under a pile of laundry, its strap bent, the glass chipped. When I confronted him, he grinned. "You weren't wearing it." "Thought it was junk," I told Jared, but he just shrugged. "He's young, Dad." "Don't make everything a drama," Melissa added. Honestly, you should be thanking him for cleaning up clutter. Clutter. That was what my life had become to them. Sentimental debris in the way of their comfort. The word rattled inside me like a cracked bell. Then came the social worker. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, dressed in khakis and a bright cardigan, carrying a soft smile and a clipboard that I knew had already been half filled before she stepped inside. Her name was Deborah. We jasmed man was Deborah's, and she was the type who mistook over-enunciation for compassion. "Walter," she said gently, "we've had a request for a wellness visit, just checking in. Nothing formal, just a little chat." I asked who requested it. She said she couldn't say. I said I already knew. She followed me into the sunroom where Margaret used to read, and we sat across from one another, the filtered sunlight catching in her glasses as she studied me like I was already half gone. She asked me my birthday, my address, what day of the week it was, who the president was. Then she asked more subtle questions. What I had eaten for breakfast, how I spent my days, whether I ever felt overwhelmed or uncertain. I answered each clearly, directly. Watching her check boxes, nod, feign understanding. I could tell she was torn. Part of her not seeing any reason to worry, another part quietly hoping to find something actionable so she could justify her visit. As we wrapped up, she smiled. "You're very sharp, Walter." I smiled back. "I know." She asked if she could speak to Jared and Melissa briefly. I said, "Not in this house. If you want to talk to them, you do it outside." She blinked, caught off guard. I stood and held the door for her. She hesitated, then stepped out onto the porch where Jared and Melissa were conveniently returning from errands. I watched them speak in low tones. Jared gestured. Melissa used her hands more, emphatic, desperate. Deborah nodded, scribbled something, and eventually got back into her car. She never asked to come in again. I don't know what they told her, but I know what I saw. People who were not reacting to a concern but managing a narrative. When she drove off, Melissa came back inside alone, her smile brittle. She said she'd follow up soon, just routine. I nodded, and when she turned around I called Martin again. We fast-tracked the evaluations. The next day I drove myself, to the medical center where Martin had arranged for 3 separate appointments, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and a geriatric physician. Each interview lasted more than an hour. They tested memory, reasoning, mood, reflexes. They asked about my diet, my medication, my sleep. I was honest but careful. I told them everything I thought mattered. Not the humiliations, not the betrayals, just the facts. I live with my son and his family. They believe I may not be safe alone. I believe otherwise. I do my own cooking. I manage my prescriptions. I read every day. I do puzzles. I still drive. I still remember my wedding anniversary, the names of my childhood friends, and the day Margaret died. They listened. They nodded. They took notes. I returned home in time for dinner. Melissa had made something frozen and microwaved, and Jared was already 2 drinks deep into a glass of something expensive he hadn't paid for. They barely looked at me when I entered the kitchen. I sat, poured myself a glass of water, and waited. Jared finally said, "How was your appointment?" I met his eyes. "Informative," I said. "You'll be hearing about it soon." He didn't ask further. Melissa didn't speak at all. Aiden, in the corner, made a noise that might have been a laugh or a cough. I didn't care. 3 days later, the reports arrived, clean, unambiguous. All 3 professionals affirmed I was competent, independent, mentally sound. Martin filed copies with the county clerk, attaching a preemptive affidavit blocking any guardianship attempts without formal challenge. I felt a weight I hadn't known was pressing on me begin to lift. That evening, I put the reports in the center of the dining table, said nothing, went to bed. The next morning, they were gone. 2 nights later, Jared exploded. I had gone to the garage to retrieve a folder, and when I came back, he was waiting at the top of the stairs, red-faced, fists clenched. "What are you doing with those papers?" he demanded. "Whose business are you talking to behind our backs?" I stepped past him calmly. My house, Jared, my lawyer, my affairs. He grabbed my shoulder, actually put his hands on me, and spun me. "You're ruining everything. Do you even know how hard we've worked to keep this place together?" I looked him in the eye. "You mean how hard you've worked to steal it from under me?" Melissa emerged from their room, face pale, eyes wide. "He's being irrational," Jared barked. "He's paranoid." "I'm not the one hiding social worker visits," I replied, "or erasing ownership records." Aiden's door creaked open behind us. He stood watching, shirtless, grinning like it was a show. The shouting escalated. Jared accused me of selfishness. Melissa wept, performatively, saying she was only trying to care for an old man who refused help. I asked if help included deceit, if love meant removal, if protection meant control. And then, clear and low, I said the sentence that would change everything. "You have 2 weeks to leave this house." Silence. Melissa choked. "What are you talking about?" "I've begun the process," I said. "I'm evicting you." "You can't," Jared snapped. "We're family." I nodded. "That's the problem." I walked away, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the old man in the house. I felt like its owner. The days that followed my declaration passed not like hours, but like drawn wires, humming with silent tension and ready to snap. Jared and Melissa did not leave, not right away. Instead, they acted as if my words had been an emotional outburst, something to be tolerated and forgotten. They tiptoed around me, voices hushed when I entered the room, their eyes darting, their hands nervous. Aiden, however, seemed invigorated by the chaos, his cruelty now blooming into open mockery. He began playing loud music late into the night, sometimes standing just outside my bedroom door so the beat would pulse through the walls. He left his dishes everywhere, laughed loudly with his online friends, and once when I came into the kitchen early in the morning, he looked up from his phone and said, "Still here, huh? Thought you were calling the cops on us or something." I didn't answer. I had stopped speaking to them entirely, except through notes. It wasn't pettiness. It was survival. I needed every word I spoke from here on to be deliberate, meaningful, legally admissible if necessary. Martin filed the notice of termination of tenancy 2 days after our last conversation. We gave them the legally required timeline, 30 days to vacate. Stay day, starting from the delivery of the notice. He recommended I send it by certified mail and have a copy posted on the door in case they claimed ignorance. I did both. Melissa tore the paper off the door and threw it in the trash. Jared fished it out later, ironed it on the kitchen counter, and sat reading it with the stunned disbelief of a man watching the foundation beneath him rot in real time. He said nothing to me that day. But that night, he left a voicemail on Martin's office line, claiming I was being manipulated, that he feared for my safety, that I was possibly experiencing a mental health break. Martin forwarded the message to me with a note. They're escalating. The next step was securing myself legally. I had changed the locks, a precaution Martin advised against until the notice period expired. but I did it anyway, replacing them during one of their rare absences. I handed Jared the new keys when he returned, watching his expression turn sour as the weight of dependency landed on his palm. "You had no right," he said. "I have every right," I replied. "I just hadn't exercised it until now." From that day on, they no longer had free access. I controlled the doors. I controlled the mail. I controlled the phone. I began documenting every encounter, recording interactions on a small pocket device I carried with me. If they tried anything, I would be ready. Then came the moment I knew was inevitable. I woke one morning to find my bedroom door ajar, though I remembered locking it, and my briefcase missing, the one I had kept hidden in the linen closet, containing copies of all documents, the deed, the medical evaluations, my will, the bank records. I tore through the house, my breath shallow, my limbs trembling not from age, but from fury. I found the briefcase behind the water heater in the garage, emptied, the papers gone. When I confronted Jared, he claimed ignorance. Melissa insisted I must have misplaced them. Aiden said nothing but smirked from the stairwell. I drove straight to Martin's office, a fire in my chest. He calmed me, helped me file a police report for unauthorized access to personal property, though he warned it would be difficult to prove theft inside a shared home. But we made our next move anyway, filing a restraining order in the event of attempted interference with my affairs and initiating preliminary action for a civil suit should any fraud be detected involving my documents or finances. Martin also advised I move out temporarily for my own safety, but I refused. This was my house. I would not be driven out of it by those who had already tried to strip it from me piece by piece. But the tipping point came not with legal forms or stolen files. It came with a laugh. One evening, I returned from the bank to find Aiden and two of his friends sitting in the living room, playing video games on the television I had bought in 1999. When I asked him to lower the volume, he said, "Why don't you go upstairs and knit something, Grandpa?" and laughed. One of his friends, a pimpled boy with greasy hair and dead eyes, echoed the laugh louder, and then Aiden turned the screen toward me where I saw myself, a clip from his social media, sleeping on the sofa, mouth open, the caption reading, "Dead man still walking." Thousands of views, dozens of comments, some laughing, some pitying, all mocking. I stood there, feeling the blood in my body thicken into something sharp. Then I reached out, yanked the console's power cord from the wall, and threw it across the room. It hit the floor with a crack. The boys jumped up. "What the hell, man?" Aiden shouted. I didn't yell. I didn't tremble. I looked at him with the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose and said, "You have until tomorrow to get out." "You're no longer welcome in my house?" "It's not just your house," he spat. "Yes, it is," I said, "legally, permanently, irrevocably." "You're insane," he said. "You're going to die here alone." "Better alone than in the company of cowards," I said. Jared tried to intervene the next morning, telling me I had gone too far, that this wasn't how families resolve things. I showed him the printed copies of Aiden's videos. "You raised this," I said. "You allowed this." Melissa wept again, but I no longer believed her tears. I gave them the timeline again. I reminded them of the court hearing date Martin had secured to enforce the eviction should they refuse to leave. I made sure they understood. One way or another, they were going. They responded with a final, desperate maneuver. The next week, they filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit, attaching falsified statements, friends of theirs posing as neighbors, claiming I'd wandered into the street, left burners on, yelled at non-existent people, but they underestimated the paper trail I had already built. Martin filed our response, and with the court within 48 hours, submitting the full reports from the independent physicians, the voice recordings of conversations, the video of Aiden mocking me. The judge reviewed everything and in a decisive ruling, dismissed their petition entirely and upheld my right to evict them by the end of the month. When I received the court's decision, I sat at the kitchen table for a long while, letting the weight of it settle. I thought I would feel triumphant, but what I felt instead was something older, deeper, a kind of quiet grief, not for what they had tried to take from me, but for the family I now had to admit had never truly existed. Not the way Margaret and I believed, not the way we hoped. I poured a glass of water, walked into the living room, and told them the verdict. Melissa looked down. Jared stood frozen. Aiden, for once, said nothing. I turned, walked upstairs, and closed the door to my bedroom. I had won. But I had also finished something, and finishing things has a cost. They left on a gray morning in late March, the sky still bruised with winter's remnants, the wind sharp enough to remind you that spring had not yet earned its name. There was no grand exit, no confrontation or plea for forgiveness. They simply packed up their things, Jared's suits and tax files, Melissa's curated kitchenware and indoor plants, Aiden's gaming equipment and arrogance, and loaded them into the same SUV they'd driven in 2 years earlier, as if nothing had happened in between. Melissa refused to meet my eyes. Jared muttered something about legal overreach and family betrayal, but the words dissolved into the cold air before they reached me. Aiden was the last to emerge from the house, earbuds in, dragging his duffel behind him like the weight of his own mediocrity. He paused for a moment on the porch, turned, and looked at me, standing in the doorway. For a moment I saw something flicker in his face. Not remorse, not understanding, but confusion. The kind that comes when the world refuses to bend the way you've been taught it should. He said nothing. He didn't smirk. And then he left. When the taillights disappeared down the block, I closed the door slowly and leaned my forehead against the wood. The house was silent again. Not the silence of oppression, but of release. A different kind of silence, one that belonged to me. I walked through each room that day as if seeing it for the first time. I opened the windows in the living room and let the wind blow away the stale arguments that had settled into the corners. I walked into the guest room that Aiden had turned into a den of screens and empty energy drinks, and I opened the closet where Margaret's sewing machine still sat, untouched. I ran my hand across it, and for the first time in years, I said her name aloud, without bitterness. I stood in the kitchen and threw out every label that Melissa had plastered over the pantry, every smug post-it note about sodium and old man digestion. I reclaimed the drawers. I dusted off the clock in the hallway. I took Margaret's photo down from the box where it had been hidden and returned it to the fireplace mantel where it belonged. For the next week, I didn't leave the house. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. Everything I had been fighting to keep was here. And yet, the quiet was not always easy. The grief, long buried under indignation and fear, began to rise now that I had space to feel it. I walked past Jared's old bedroom and remembered helping him paint the walls blue. I found an old drawing Aiden had made when he was 6. Me, with exaggerated ears, holding his hand. I kept it. I didn't forgive him, but I kept it. Martin called to follow up, to tell me the court had finalized everything. The eviction was complete. The house was safe. I thanked him. He asked if I would consider renting out the upper floor or getting someone to help with errands. I said maybe, but not yet. I wasn't ready to share it again. Not yet, maybe not ever. Spring came slowly that year, as if the world itself was cautious. But when the roses bloomed, they did so without hesitation. bursting open as if Margaret herself had coaxed them from the frost. I spent my mornings in the garden, hands in the soil, back aching, mind quiet. I cooked for myself. I read the newspaper in full. I remembered what it was to be someone. One Sunday afternoon I received a letter. Handwritten, unfamiliar. It was from Aidan. 3 pages. Rambling. He didn't apologize, not really. But he admitted he had been cruel, that he hadn't understood what the house meant, that he hadn't understood what I meant. He said he was trying to figure himself out, that maybe one day he'd like to visit if I'd let him. I didn't answer. But I didn't throw it away either. The house is mine again. Not just in deed, but in spirit. And I've learned that survival isn't just about outlasting others. It's about remembering who you are when everyone else has tried to rewrite you. I am Walter Dean. I was a husband, a teacher, a father. I was almost erased, but I endured. And now, in the stillness I reclaimed, I am more than what they tried to take from me. I am what remains.